Welcome to the Freedom Founder Podcast. I'm your host, Zach Duggar. Now, have you ever watched someone climbing a mountain? Have you ever thought about it yourself? Let me tell you, my guest today has made world records in her efforts that she has overcome in climbing mountains, but also in life and business as well. So, thank you, Jenn, for joining me on the show today.
Thank you, Zach, for having me.
Absolutely. I love to have conversations with people who have overcome challenges and have endured different things, but also have kind of made that opportunity to become successful in their own right and help others on their journey. But I'd love to talk a little bit about how you got started. What was your kind of foundation in that entrepreneurial journey?
Yeah. So my dad was self-employed, which probably
Mhm.
helped a lot. My grandma would always have a garage sale and make her spending money all summer. And all growing up, she's like, you need to be responsible for your own money, just so you know. And every time she had a garage sale, I'd have a little lemonade stand or I'd sell little like trinkets, and those were my things. And so I think the entrepreneurial journey was my path because of my childhood. I will say I did an internship in college where we were hiring temporary labor to manufacture chairs for offices. And we had 200 people on the line working. And then Y2K happened.
Hmm.
And all of a sudden, we had to get rid of these 200 people. Now, why I didn't quit that internship at that time, I have no idea, but I stayed. And then every human, right? They're like, but I worked extra and I worked these weekends and I missed all this stuff so that I could get a full-time job here. What do you mean I don't have a job anymore? And I just realized I don't do things part way. Like I'm all in or I'm not. And I did not want to be all in somewhere and have somebody else determine whether I had a job or not.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the nail in the coffin. I studied finance in college, did a 1099 job with a firm for a few years, and then went to a different one and then started my own.
Okay. Yeah. Oh man, I imagine that would be difficult to watch 200 people getting laid off as an intern and being able to see how that could be you, whether if it was you in that type of role or someday if you're in a position.
Right. Yeah, no, it's just one of those reality checks. I'm like, wow, that I would lose my marbles if this happened to me
Yeah.
because there's nothing you can do. And having somebody else so responsible for your livelihood, it just was
Yeah.
not okay for me.
Absolutely. And I do like that support and encouragement of your grandmother, especially, I think you got to make your own money and figuring out a way to do it. So starting early at lemonade stand and grandma making money on the garage sales for that extra spending cash. I think there are a lot of people who don't get that push and then they're on their own and now what do I do? Well, I go get a job. So it's not always pushed as an option to even consider whether there's an opportunity right in front of them where they could go out on their own or not. So there's fear involved with that too.
Hmm.
Is there any way that you have overcome the fear or trepidation of becoming an entrepreneur or going out on your own, or was that something that really was instilled in you early on and you didn't have to overcome fear?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think we all have to overcome fear at some level or another. It's how well we manage it. I remember getting into finance and I guess I didn't interview well. I have no idea. I took this job as an investment advisor at this firm and I was all excited and I graduated from college early to take this job and I told my parents, I'm like, "Hey, this is what I'm going to go do." And they're like, "Okay, fine, but you have to stay at that career for a year because otherwise you're too young and it's not going to look good for like getting to other jobs." I'm like, I can stay at this job for a year, no big deal. Like that's why I took this job. And I go to show up for this job and I'm like, "Hi, I'm Jen. I'm the new financial advisor." And he's like, "Okay, great, honey. Like over there at that table, there's a phone and a phone book. Why don't you sit there?" I'm like, "Oh, no, no, I'm not call center. I'm financial advisor." And she's like,
Mm-hmm.
"Honey, they're the same thing." I'm like, "What?" And so like, I had to cold call, and I had never heard the word no
Yeah.
so many times in my life. And I would go home sobbing and crying and I knew I couldn't call my parents. Like that was not an option. But I called the school and I said, "Hey, do you think I could get back in?" Like, I was kidding. I didn't really want to graduate. And they're like, "Honey, your school started. You'd have to re-register, blah, 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 blah. It's not really an option for this semester."
Hmm.
And I was like, "Oh my goodness." So for me, I had to stay. I mean, I literally circled the day on the calendar for the year. I'm like, okay, well, I just have to survive this for a year and I have to make it fun. Otherwise, every day it's going to be miserable. And so I have an out, but it's in a year from now. The nice thing about financial advising and cold calling that if you do it for a year, you figure it out. And then
Hmm.
all of a sudden you start making an income that you're like, well, wow, I'm not gonna be able to replace this doing something else as a salary or whatever. But I do think committing to the commitment is the big lesson there of giving yourself enough time and just being like, this is what I'm doing. I'm not allowed to spend energy on figuring out how to get out of this thing. The only energy I can spend is how do I make this thing more enjoyable or more successful or more whatever because I'm here.
Right. Yeah. Oh, I think that's a great perspective to have. And going into a position, making those calls, getting told no, and actually having to go through the process of people not feeling successful. I mean, honestly, I think that's a challenge that many people don't want to face. And I think some people will just stop. They'll quit. They
Hmm.
will move on. They've not had to have that experience or not been encouraged to push through to that extent. So it's good that you had that family that was behind you to say, hey, you got to do this, stick it out for a year. And then you actually do find you can be successful if you really give it that effort and stick with it. So now I introduced this podcast with the conversation about climbing mountains, and
Yeah.
this topic of this title of this episode, Summit of Significance. And love to hear a little bit about when did that come into the process here, where you decided that you were going to go and reach the summit of some of these mountains that many people will never ever see or do.
Yeah. So I did this finance career and then I
Hmm.
went out on my own and I decided that it was time to have kids and I wanted to be a stay-at-home mom because I was raised like that's the dream job. So
Yeah.
I worked to hire myself out of a job. So I owned the company, but figured out how to not have to work at it on a daily basis, started having kids, and then realized, man, maybe my personality isn't perfect for being a stay-at-home mom. I
Hmm.
love that there's women in that space. It's
Yeah.
not me, but I felt really guilty and bad that I wasn't more grateful for this opportunity that I had that other people I knew would be beyond ecstatic for. So I
Sure.
kind of stuck with it and I said, hey, you know what? Once my kids get to college, then
Mhm.
I'll do things that get me excited again. But right now, this is just the season of life that I'm in. And so I would say I was surviving, but not really thriving.
Okay.
And then on December 18 of 2018, I got into a horrific car crash that should have taken my life. And by the miracles of miracles, it didn't. In fact, I even had the police call me after the accident a few weeks later and just say, like, hey, we've tried to rebuild this thing every
Mhm.
way possible. We cannot build a scenario where you live, let alone walk away. And that encounter, that near death experience was a line in the sand. And
Mhm.
it made me realize I don't get to choose when I die,
Yeah.
but I sure get to choose how I live. And if my life was over next year, or in 5 years, or in 10 years, or in 2 months, man, there's a lot of things I want to see, do, and experience still.
Mhm.
And why am I buying into this thing that we have time? We don't know if we have time. And so 2019 became this year of like, who am I? What do I want to do? Blah, 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 blah. And climb a mountain was on that list.
Mhm.
I was turning 40 in 2020. So when I looked over the list, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to climb a mountain for my 40th birthday. That's going to be a way to launch that next decade of significance.
Yeah.
So I asked friends that were into mountaineering, if you could climb one mountain in the whole world, what would you climb? And the general consensus was a mountain named Ama de Blanc. I hadn't heard of it, but they're like, hey, it's the Paramount Pictures logo. So every single time you go to a movie and Paramount is the movie provider, like you're gonna be like, I climbed that mountain. I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool. I'll do that. And if we can remember back to 2020, COVID entered the scene. So I'm not going to any mountain to climb. And in fact, I'm homeschooling my 7 children right now because their school is not in session. And one day, one of my little guys was struggling with his math homework. So I'm giving him that parent pep talk that we give, like, we do hard things. You've got this. Like, da, 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 da. And he looks up at me and he goes, if we do hard things, why are you climbing a mountain called I'm a Dumb Blonde instead of a real mountain like Mount Everest? I'm like, I'm a dumb blonde. I'm a da blom, not I'm a dumb blonde. But thanks, honey. That's great. Finish your homework. We'll look at Everest. And so we did. And he went to bed and I was still looking at Everest. And I thought, you know what? If this kid thinks Everest is the hardest mountain in the whole world, I'm going to climb it and show him that whatever metaphorical mountain that's in front of us, we can summit. And so I call a coach, maybe kind of hoping that he's like, no, that's crazy. Don't do that. No, not at all. He's like, yeah, I can get you ready. You'll be good. No problem. Buy this book about becoming an uphill athlete. Okay, so I buy this book, and in the front of the book is a story about a lady who got a Guinness World Record. And I was having a bad day, I think. I mean, I don't know. Timing is so much of our lives. And my coach is talking to me, and I tell him, I'm like, I could have done that. Like, I could have done what that lady did. Like, I can do hard suffering type things, and I would be cool because I'm not cool right now. My kids don't like that I'm a homeschool teacher, but they learned how to read on Guinness World Record books. And my coach is like, I'll think of something. And I kind of let it go because it was one of those conversations that you're just having to blow off steam. And then a few weeks later, he calls me. He's like, Jen, I have the perfect world record for you. I'm like, okay. He's like, I think you should be the first female to climb the 7-second summits. It sounded like a tongue twister to me. I didn't even know what he was talking about or what one of those things were. And he's like, listen, the 7-second summits are the second highest point on each of the 7 continents. They're actually harder than the first 7. They've only been done by one male. So you'd be the first female. And if you think about it, 7 continents, 7 mountains, 7 children, sounds like a jackpot. Mm-hmm. And I don't know why I can say this, but like I had a full body yes. I'm like, yeah, it does sound awesome and exciting and all this cool stuff. And I mean, I'd never slept in a tent before. So like, who am I to even say yes to this thing? But I've learned that when something inside of us gets us excited, that's an opportunity to live. So I said yes and started on this pursuit. And it's been a fantastic journey.
Yeah. Yeah. We do hard stuff. I like that statement that you made to your child when they're confronting you with the challenging work that they're doing. And it's like, well, if you're doing that, if we do hard stuff, then why aren't you climbing Everest?
Right, totally.
So,
makes sense. Fair enough.
Yeah, absolutely. Encouragement there. And then just blowing off steam, coming up with this world record that you could accomplish and that full body yes, that I can do this. That is truly impressive and amazing to be able to make that commitment and not just make the commitment, but make the accomplishment.
Yeah.
I don't think a lot of people understand the work. I don't even understand the work that's involved with preparation and getting to accomplish that type of goal. Can you give us a little bit of example or information on the work involved to get to that point?
Yeah. The mountain is climbed before you get to the mountain, just like the game is won before you get to the game, right? It's in the preseason, it's in the training, it's in all those pieces. Luckily, I live in Park City, Utah. So we have mountains all the way around us. So that helps with training. I'm a very systems person and disciplined. So for me, it was looking at the week, structuring it for success, and then just executing, right? I didn't have to let my mind make decisions throughout the week. It was decided, and here's what I did. And I knew because I sat with that schedule before that I was taking care of the things that were important, my family, the business, and being an athlete. So yeah, I mean, did a lot of my life change? For sure. I mean, it was a lifestyle for the last 2.5 years of my life to make that pursuit happen. If friends wanted to hang out, it was on a hike. It was, doing step ups with me at a soccer game so that I could watch my kid play and still get exercise in, or you just get creative. And I think that's the fun of life is when you set a goal for yourself that seems crazy. Like now you get to play and get curious and figure out like what works, what doesn't, how do I make this happen? And making it happen is where it's fun.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. So going through that, you actually got to bring people alongside of you so you could still do those things of life, having family, friends, relationships where you needed to be, but also be able to work towards this goal that you had to accomplish. Discipline, you mentioned being disciplined and having to kind of organize in systems that make it work. And I imagine having a large family, that's important too, so it's not chaotic in your daily life, as especially when children are young. Is there anything that you could give to our listeners as far as systems and organization and keeping goals oriented that would help encourage them on their journey to their goal, their summit of significance?
Yeah, I think it's allowing for reiterations,
Mhm.
right? You're never going to hit it right in the beginning. And what works this quarter might not work next quarter, and allowing that to have the structure with the flexibility. So, for example, in my household, I was looking at where I was spending time, and I'm like, man, I'm in the car all the time. And anybody who has kids probably feels that way. And so at first, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to hire someone to help do the driving. So someone
Mhm.
came on to help do the driving, so I had time to do other things. And then I realized, wait, all the conversations happen in the car because now I have my kid locked in a vehicle where we're driving on the road and there's less distractions. So we get to have really intimate conversations. I was like, nope, never mind. We're not taking, I'm going to take back the driving and somebody else is going to do the laundry or the dishes or different things like that just gave us the take time. So it's really doing a time audit and saying, okay, is this worth my time? Not only financially, but emotionally and mentally, right? Like, so financially, it did not make sense for me to be an Uber driver for my family, but
Mhm.
emotionally, it did because that's when I got to have the conversations and the connection time with the kids. So I'm like, okay, well, guess what? I'm doing the driving and we're going to have to hire something else out that gives us balance. So allowing yourself to try things and reiterate what works, what doesn't, and just keep adjusting and adapting and figuring it out for what works for you. I think we listen to all of the posts or the stories of people of like their morning routines or their gratitude journals or like whatever. Some of those routines would take me 10 hours and it's a morning
Mhm.
routine. And I don't have that kind of time. So I'm just saying, like, who does this? Like, really? Like, that exists? Um,
Mhm.
so, for me, I don't have time to do gratitude journal, but I believe in gratitude. So now every single time I hit this red light by my house, I've turned that into my gratitude light. So
Yeah.
anytime I hit it red, I start going through my gratitude list. And that's a trigger to get it to work for me and helps me feel good about my life.
Yeah. So you can adapt the strategies that you hear of others and make it fit in your life if it's something that you want to do. It doesn't have to be a journal. It could be a red light signal, essentially. That's my cue to go ahead and do this thing that I'm going to want to put into this everyday life. But yeah, I like that time audit too. I think that's important too, to not only figure out what you don't need to do physically, but also financially, and then readjusting because, like you said too, every quarter there might be some reiterations where you have to go through, go back to the drawing board, do something a little bit different. It's not everything is going to work right out of the gates.
Right.
So now you've written a book.
Mhm.
Is just it's a breakproof. Is that correct? I see it in the background. I
Yep.
want to make
Yep.
sure. Talk to us a little bit about that book and what the person who's reading that will gather from that book as they go on that journey with you.
Yeah. So when I was halfway through the mountaineering pursuit,
Uh-huh.
I went out to lunch with a friend, and my friend was like, "These stories are fascinating." He goes,
Yeah.
"You need to write a book." I'm like, "Okay." And so I thought about it, and the reality is it's amazing how much mountaineering has to do with life and business. Like the
Mhm.
metaphor could not be more perfect for what you're doing. And so I'm like, "You know what? I'm going to write this book and take the reader on each adventure with me." And then highlight a lesson that I learned at that particular mountain that they can apply to their own lives as they're climbing their metaphorical mountains. and help them extract that and reflect that back into your life. Because sometimes when we see things in the extreme, they become crystal clear. And so then it's easier for us to see them in our own story. And so I take the
Mhm.
reader to these different places and we go through different lessons that I learned. And yeah, it's been really positively received so far. And I'm super excited about it.
And now, are there any specific lessons? If we could talk about one lesson that, I mean, they're all of significance, but if we could talk about one lesson just to highlight that for the listeners so that they understand what kind of concept they're getting out of this book. Because, man, that has to, like your friend said, the stories have to have been pretty impressive in regards to your own experience, and to be able to share that with others and then apply it in a way that they can take into their lives, and not just life, but also into business.
Yeah. So I'd say one lesson that resonates, like that's my go-to lesson
Mhm.
all the time, is big mountains take big teams. So if you have a big goal or a big business you're trying to build, or you have a big family, or you have like anything that's big, I don't know why we're convinced that that means we have to carry that load all the way to the top ourselves or do all of it ourselves.
Mhm.
And so I think when people set this big goal for themselves, and then they find themselves negotiating, right? Like, oh, that was me being crazy. I didn't mean it to be that big, or we're going to be whatever, right? Like that point is a sign to say, wait, do I have enough people to
Mhm.
make this goal happen? Am I running out of steam or energy or trying to cut this goal and have it look different because there's not enough who's to make the how happen? And I just realized, like, when I climbed Everest, I had a team at home taking care of the kids. You had a team managing the food. You had a team managing like moving gear up the mountain. You had like there's so many people involved for me to climb Everest. Like I'm like the smallest part of it. Like all I did had to do is walk because there's so many other things going on. And when we set these Everest like goals, I mean, I think we're trying to do it all. And then we can't get to the top because we run out of juice. And so
Mhm.
that's one of the big lessons that I learned from climbing. And now anytime that I'm starting to feel tired or overwhelmed or losing my enthusiasm for a pursuit, I pause. I'm like, okay, big mountains, big teams. Do I have a big enough team to bring this to the top?
Yeah. No, I think that absolutely resonates with me, and I'm sure it resonates with a lot of our listeners too, especially when you're starting a new business or new venture, just a new journey. You sometimes have to take on all the roles, but then it's hard to let go. And
Yes.
so you start to have that desire for that Everest like goal. But in order to do that, you do need more people on the team, and you need to let go and let others be a part of that and help them to allow them to carry the load for you on pursuit of that goal. So what is that thing that you're doing now that you've completed this 7-second summits, tongue twister,
Yes.
and written this book, and you have these lessons that you have learned and have been able to share through this? Are you doing speaking engagements? Are you doing coaching? I mean, what are you doing now that, somebody that's listening to this, if I didn't have a conversation with you before, I'd be like, I want to talk to her. I want to know what she's done and how can she accomplish all these things?
Yeah. So I'm definitely on stages right now. I absolutely
Yeah.
love the speaking stage and just the energy of that transaction.
Mhm.
The book is being turned into a course so that I can work with people in a more intimate setting and help them apply the lessons to their life. So we're hoping that will be ready by the end of first quarter of 2024. And then I have some retreat type adventures that people can participate in just to unplug from the world and really get in tune with their authentic self so that when you're coming from a place of your heart, you have way more energy to do whatever you're doing. And so helping them tap into that energy and bringing it forward. But yeah, no, I mean, now it's like you climb the mountain, and the
Mhm.
joy of climbing the mountain is sharing the pursuit so that you can help others climb theirs.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. I love that it's not just a metaphor for you individually, but it absolutely is a metaphor for others, that they can endure the work that they are on, a path that they are on to get to their summit, whatever that might be, and that you can share your experience and your journey that can very much apply to everyone's lives. I mean, as a parent, as a businesswoman, as someone who has scaled these summits of significance in their own life. I mean, I'm super impressed by what you've accomplished and what you're doing now, and absolutely glad to hear that you're on stages and going to be sharing this in intimate settings with others because of that journey that you've experienced. So I do want to ask one question that I always ask all of my guests. If you were to be handed $1 million today, no restrictions attached to that, what would you do with that to invest it either in your current endeavor or something else, and why?
Yeah, I think at this stage in my life, I would invest it in donations to
Mhm.
get people outside. For example, I'm taking 3 of my boys to Africa to go climb Kilimanjaro in
Mhm.
February of 2024, and just having those opportunities to get out of our current environment and
Mhm.
learn about ourselves in another environment just allows us to see how much our environment dictates who we are. And I think if more people had that opportunity, the world would be a better place.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that answer. I think getting people outside. We're so media driven anymore, and so getting the opportunity to unplug and reconnect. And I think that your retreat that you mentioned is a great way to do that as well. But love that answer. Well, if our guests want to find out more about you, what's the best way for someone to connect with you and the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so check out the website, jendrummond.com. You'll find my social media handles and access to everything else. And then also for everybody listening today, if you want to text the word Everest to the number 33777, so that's 33777, text the word Everest, you'll get a picture or video of the Milky Way going over Everest Base Camp. And it's one of my favorite videos that I have. And that's why I share it with others because life gets crazy and hectic and all these things. And that little like 20-second clip just reminds me of how big and magical this world is. And it gets me out of my head and into like just being again. So I want everybody to have that option to share.
Yeah, love that gift. Reminder of how big and mighty the world is and the magnanimous it is in our surrounding that we sometimes forget. So love it, Jen. And thank you very much for your time today. Really appreciated this conversation. I look forward to hearing more about the work you're doing as you continue to help others and continue to scale the summits of life.